Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church devotional that we're doing every week, and we're going through the book of Genesis. We've gone through Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And in the last devotion, we talked about how not the most important chapter in the Bible, but one of the most important chapters of the Bible, which talks about who we really are, our fallen nature, which is the fact that we did not trust God's goodness and all of the results of that. We saw the condition that puts us in and the consequences that comes after that. And then there's the hope of restoration, all about God's goodness in Genesis chapter 3. Then we get to Genesis chapter 4. And many people know Genesis chapter 1 is creation, chapter 2 is more marriage and work. We learned that. And Genesis 3 is where sin came from. And many people know that aspect of Genesis. But now we're coming to Genesis 4, and a lot of times people stop at Genesis 3 and don't go into Genesis 4 and can't remember too much what's going on there. And actually, Genesis 4 shows us some interesting history about where culture comes from, where culture and innovation and all those kinds of things, even in a sin-cursed world. But that's really not the point, even though that's in there as the backdrop. No, Genesis 4 is going to teach us about really, truly the, the, the consequences of sin that happen, but also just the danger of sin, and really what God is saying, what we must do to actually get to the place where we can see His goodness and grace. We can't do it by just trying on our own, that's for sure. And so this chapter really teaches us about patience and depending totally on God as really the only way to really battle sin. And we're going to see that right here in Genesis 4. So if you have your Bibles, we're in Genesis chapter 4, and take a look. And we're going to just go section by section. And let's read here. I'm going to read just the first verse. There's a very important observation to make there. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I've gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Stop there for a second. A couple of observations here. Some of your Bibles might show that there's words in italicized font, the help of, with the help of. Those words really are not there in Hebrew. And the translators tried to solve a problem that they didn't need to solve when they put that in there. Now, Eve is not saying, look, I had a baby. I got a baby and the Lord helped me with that baby. That's not what she's saying. That wouldn't make any sense at all in the scheme of Genesis here. But let me tell you what does make absolute sense. Let's follow it right here. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Now notice, this is after God cursed childbirth that we learned in chapter 3. Childbirth is going to be more intensely painful. Eve was still willing to go along with this because why? Her desires for her husband, even though he will rule over her, her desire still for her husband. She desires that relational component and knows that we need to fill the earth. And so they had relations, and she conceived, even though it was in painful childbirth, and gave birth to Cain. That was their first child, named him Cain. And she said, I've gotten a man-child, and we take out with the help of, and notice what it might say there. And she said, I've gotten a man-child, the Lord. Now, where this makes sense is she's saying, I've gotten a man-child, and it doesn't say, she doesn't use the word begotten, or I have born, or I have birthed. She doesn't use those words. She used the words acquired. I was able to get, I was able to acquire, and then she uses the word man-child. Don't you find that interesting? Not the word normally for child, baby, youth, boy. No, she doesn't use that word. She used the word man-child, literally man-child. She's thinking now this is going to be a man. And take out with the help of, and what do you have? The Lord. Why would she say that? Did she give birth to God? No, what she's saying is, I gave birth to the offspring that will crush his head in Genesis 3:15. Remember that? Genesis 3:15. He says, and between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. So she realizes there's great judgment coming that will help bring deliverance. And this is where their hope comes from. Her offspring will actually judge this wicked serpent. So what is she thinking? She's thinking the very first child she has, that's the offspring. There it is, right there. She's affected by sin. She's thinking wrongly because of sin. Not yet still fully trusting God's goodness. And so what's her first thought is, I've got the consequences of my sin. I'm out of the garden. And she thinks immediately, deliverance right away. There he is. That's the offspring that's going to do it. I've gotten a man-child, the Lord. That's literally what it says in Hebrew right there when Moses wrote that. So what do I make of that? I make that she's actually thinking God is faithful. We have now the offspring. Tells you about her level of patience, doesn't it? She's thinking she's going to be delivered right away when she is now in this mess of being out of the garden. So she carries on. And we'll see in verses 2 through 7, the next section comes in. Again, she gave birth to his brother Abel. So she got pregnant again and had Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Two brothers, but they didn't necessarily share the same interest. One was a keeper of the flocks, the other was a farmer. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. So Cain brings his corn, his mealies, his fruit, and all of that. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. Notice that's the first sacrifice given by people right here. That's right after they got out of the garden. He had to kill animals, just like God killed animals to put skins on them. He had to kill animals and offered the blood, offered the fat right here, and their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. So the Lord said, I like that offering here. But for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. Cain was very upset. Why did Abel get recognized but Cain did not? Well, obviously, Cain and Abel both were told how to bring their worship, and Cain did not follow God's instructions. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door and its desires for you, but you must master it. This is the lesson we must understand about sin. Sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, to own you. But you must master it. That's the situation we're in. That's life. We're now in a sin-cursed world. We're born dead to God, alive to sin. And sin desires to own us, become slaves of sin. That's what Romans 6 talks about. But we must master it. How do we do this? That's what he told Cain, you must do this. Cain wasn't very happy with that. So in verse 8, Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. It doesn't tell us why. Just says the next day he just rose up and he killed his brother. That's just incredible. Some would say he was the greatest mass murderer in the history of the world because he killed 25% of the world's population in one shot. Wiped out his only brother. Well, the Lord then, verse 9 says to Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? That's where that line comes from. Am I my brother's keeper? Came from after Cain killed his brother. And he said, what have you done? This is God talking to him. What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. These are people. This is someone speaking to his creator back and forth. And this is the arrogance when you're speaking to your creator. And you're lying to him. Remember Satan, he's the father of lies. And people who follow him will lie and lie and lie because they do wicked things and have to lie about it. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You'll be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from the face your face I'll be hidden, which I'll be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. See, Cain is saying, I can't handle this. God, you're not a good God. You're a bad God because, look, after I killed my brother, now you made it even more difficult for me to farm, and you made it to where people aren't going to want to relate with me. I won't have any friends. I know this is difficult when there's only these people on the earth, but this is what he's saying. God says, here's what you have to deal with because you killed your brother. And Cain says, that's too much. You're a bad God. Again, remember the condition that we saw in Genesis chapter 3? I flee from God. I hide from God. I blame shift. It's not my fault. This is what Cain is saying. So, even in the face of being slandered, God says, so the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain so that no one finding him would slay him. So he actually protected Cain, the murderer. He protected the murderer. And yet, he still calls God bad. So we see how sin is crouching at the door. Its desires to have you, but you must master it. If you don't master it, what happens? You kill God. You kill your brother. You lie to God. You slander God. And then you have to really wallow in your consequences. Sin desires to have you in that condition. Well, as time goes on, now we see the introduction of culture. Verse 16, then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So he went away from his family, and he settled. Now, obviously, a lot of time went by here. There's times not marked in anywhere in Genesis 4. It's just giving us the overview of what's happening. It says Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. The question people would say, well, where did Cain get a wife? If Cain was the first child and Enoch or Abel was the second child, where does the wife come from? Well, we don't have that answer. And Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says, God put eternity in our hearts so that we would never know the beginning from the end. And we can guess and speculate and say, oh, it must have been one of his sisters or something like that. We don't know. It's not important. What's important is God is showing us the development of how history is building here. So Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived, gave birth to Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. So Cain builds the city, names it after his son. Again, everything's about what? I'm important, I'm big, I deserve, so I'm going to build a city, call it after the name of my son. I'm going to make everything about me, my family, and that's the idea. That's where we see a lot of names around cities, towns are named after people. Prominence. Verse 18, now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methushael, and Methushael became the father of Lamech. Lamech took to himself two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. This is not ordained by God. God said this man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one husband, one wife. But now here's Lamech that wants to pervert the idea of marriage, and he takes on two wives. This is not God saying this is okay. He doesn't approve polygamy. But Lamech is poking his finger in the eye of God, and he has two wives here. So already marriage and culture is being corrupted so quickly. Well, Ada gave birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So this young boy here, Jabal, he was a guy who learned how to take all the animals, the livestock, and do just coordinating the various types of animals and using them for milk and all of the things that they do. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all of those who play the lyre and pipe. This is where music comes from. They developed the idea of playing music with musical instruments, the mathematical properties of music, all of that. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And so Tubal-Cain, He just started to develop industry. They began to make bronze and iron and forging, and so used heat. So this was science right here. So we can see the introduction of industry, culture, music, farming, agriculture, arts, sciences. We see it all right there. The elements of culture were from Lamech and his family. But it came from an ungodly family, a man with 2 wives. It doesn't tell you about the character of these men, but they developed this culture. So culture came from God. It's in the image of God. These are good things that animals can't come up with. How to do farming, how to do industry, how to do music and arts. That's wonderful. Creativity. But without any view of God. Because Lamech raised them saying, I've got 2 wives. And then he said this in verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I've killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. So he killed someone as well. Bragging. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. He says if God can put a mark on Cain and say, I'm going to avenge him 7 times, I'm going to do better than God. I'm going to do 77. So I'm basically 11 times better than God. That's what Lamech was saying. I'm so proud. Nobody can defy me. I killed a man. So you could see pride going up just as much as culture. So as culture is rising, so is pride. A man who is now boasting about his killing and what he has and has multiple wives, sets his own laws. So while there's some good in culture, with all that is the pride, the desire to name everything after yourself. You need to have the fame, and you don't care about anybody else. That's all happening then. Sin is now ruling and owning everybody. Sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is to have you. This is sin. This is what David calls presumptuous sins. These are sins that you know, and it begins to own you more and more, like an addiction. This is an answer to why we have problems today. This is an answer to why all of us face difficulties with things of our past that we can't get rid of. This is why you might not be able to fight certain things of the flesh, because this is what's inherent in us. This is who we are. We demand to be recognized. We demand to be elevated. Yet we also like culture. We like the interest of farming and agriculture and industry and the achievements that happen. And those things are very interesting and really great. But what comes with it is an element of saying, I need to be worshiped. I need to be elevated. And I can't be criticized. I want. This is why we have problems. All people have problems. Christians fight these problems. You might be fighting a lot of problems like this. This is where it comes from. Genesis chapter 4 is the picture that God's giving us. And it started, if you remember, with Eve saying, hey, we're out of our predicament. Look here, the first child I got, that's our deliverer. That's our Messiah. That's the offspring who's going to crush this Satan's head and we'll be back to normal and in the garden. She thought it was going to happen right away. God said, oh no. We need to now begin the process of connecting back with me through worship, and I atone for your sins. I cover your sins, and we'll bring that relationship back as you will slowly understand what it is to depend on me. See, right now you're not depending on me. You're saying the first child, problem solved. You're not depending on me. See, she was looking for an easy out. God told Cain, sin's crouching at the door. You don't want to let this happen. He didn't listen to God. Sin owned him. And he killed his brother, lied to God, slandered God. That's the pattern continually, over and over and over again. That's what happens in our life. But that's not the end of Genesis 4. Thankfully, there's now hope that God gives us right here at the end, as we see in verses 25 and 26. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For, she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. It's interesting that the word Seth in Hebrew means appointed, like God appointed him to be born. God appointed him to be special. We're going to see in our devotion on Genesis 5 how special. But he was appointed. And she would say, okay, by God, maybe appointed. I tried Cain, thought he was the one. He killed Abel. So now what am I left with? I'm left with nobody, because surely my offspring, who's going to wipe out the seed of Satan, is not going to be the one who killed his brother. And it's certainly not going to be his brother, who's now dead. So they had another son named Seth. Verse 26. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. The word Enosh is a word that means man. Adam, the first human being, that word means man. We see it translated throughout the Bible. Adam, it means mankind, man. There's a second Hebrew word that means man. It's the word ish. We get that here today. You say, ish, oh man. Yeah, that's what it means. It's just a general man. There's nothing special about the word. But there's a third word that means man, and that's the word Enosh. Enosh. And what it means is a weak man, a sick man, a tired man. That's what the word Enosh means. To be weak and sick, sickly. Seth called his son Enosh, the weak one. And you know what happened after he had Enosh? Look at the very next sentence. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. People only began to call on the name of the Lord when they were able to understand their weakness, their need to depend on God. Then they become strong. You see, that's the whole idea with sin. Sin says, let's build you up strong so that you will become weak in the flesh. And you will lie, you will cheat, you will steal, you will kill, you will slander, you will do all those things and won't think anything about it, and you will lust for more. God says, no, you must become weak and depend on me, and I will make you strong. That's our hope that we have. It began with lack of patience in Eve. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Thinking, oh, that's it, God will solve my problem. No, God's going to have to show you, because you are now addicted, a slave of sin, and its desires to master you. Your only hope is to become dependent on God, and He will deliver you. You cannot break through on your own at all. You try, you will end up doing the works and the acts of Cain. And the same thing, as culture is developed, what good there is, what comes with it is all the pride of sin. The only thing that works is when we begin to understand who we are and depend on God, and then He will deliver us. That's the lesson out of Genesis chapter 4. Understanding we need to depend on God in everything. That's it. And we'll see you on Genesis chapter 5.